Chapter 13. "Mom, we have to go back," Katie said. It wasn't the first time her daughter had said it, but Lacy wasn't in the mood to explain the situation any longer. "We can help them," Katie said, "and they need our help." "Keep your voice down," Lacy said. "I need to be able to hear what's going on around us." Katie grunted in frustration, but Lacy let it slide. All that mattered was she was getting to the homestead as quickly as possible, where Lacy was confident she could keep her daughter safe. The homestead was close enough to town for them to get supplies, but far enough away for them not to be bothered. She had purchased an extensive tract of land after her husband had died, which she was able to afford from the insurance policy he'd taken out for himself. Sean had always been a planner. From the moment they met, he'd had his life mapped out. He knew exactly what he wanted, and Lacy had always been attracted to that confidence. It was one of the reasons his death had been so brutal. None of them were prepared for him to be gone so soon. They were supposed to grow old together. They were supposed to go on more trips, see more of the world, and watch their children grow into adults. But Sean had missed so much of that. Lacy was still angry about his death, and that anger had lingered for much longer than it should have. There were unresolved issues, and if she were honest with herself, she was afraid to unearth them again. She had buried them shortly after she had buried her husband, and she would be fine keeping them underground until she joined them whenever her time expired. However, Lacy wasn't blind to the needs of her children. They had inherited their father's good heart, but Lacy had tried to instill a healthy skepticism in them. Not that it had done much good. Once Lacy dropped her daughter off at the homestead, she planned to return to the Welcome Center to help her fellow rangers. She wasn't going to abandon the people she was charged with leading. She wasn't that kind of woman. She wasn't that kind of leader. They eventually neared the homestead, which was well off the beaten path of the country road they followed on their way back. They turned up the gated dirt path, marching past the no trespassing signs, and when Lacy stepped onto her property, she breathed a sigh of relief. They weren't out of the woods yet, not by a long shot, but she couldn't have been happier to be closer to getting her daughter to safety. "Listen," Lacy said, holding her daughter's hand. "When we get home, I will have to leave again. I need to go back to work and help some people."
"I thought you said people don't deserve our help,"
Katie said mockingly. "Hey," Lacy said, and she forced them to stop. "The world is more complicated than you realize."
"Helping people isn't complicated, Mom," Katie said. "Dad told me that, and you used to agree with him."
It wasn't the first time Katie had used her father's words against her mother, and Lacy doubted it would be the last, but she needed her daughter to understand something, so she forced them both to a stop and dropped to a knee so she could look Katie in the eye. "Listen to me," Lacy said. "The world is on fire right now. I understand that you want to save everyone, but you need to understand that the only people who matter to me are you and your brother. You are my family, my life, and if anything ever happened to you, I wouldn't forgive myself."
"Mom, we can be safe and you can still help other people," Katie said. "They're not mutually exclusive."
Lacy tilted her head to the side. "Where did you learn that word?"
"I heard Dusty using it while listening to the radio," Katie answered. "I know what it means, I think."
She frowned, furrowing her eyebrows together like Sean used to. "It's amazing how much you look like your father," Lacy said, cupping Katie's face. "I love you, your kind heart, and all the good things you want to do. But I want you to promise me something."
"What?"
Katie asked. "You promise me that you won't do anything foolish while I'm gone?" Lacy asked. "Because I don't want to lose you. I can't lose you." Katie was quiet, and her expression softened as she lunged forward and hugged her mother.
"I promise."
Lacy squeezed her daughter back tightly, and as the pair embraced, they both jumped at the sound of a gunshot. Lacy immediately pushed her daughter behind her to protect her and glanced down the road. It was always hard to tell the direction a gunshot had come from, especially in the wilderness, where the sound bounced around. But Lacy had hunted in the woods for a long time, and she could determine precisely where the gunshot had come from. It was down the road near the homestead, except this wasn't a gunshot. It was one of the tripwires she'd set as a security alarm around the house. Lacy immediately pulled Katie off the dirt path and into the woods, out of her sight. She tucked her daughter behind a cluster of fallen logs. "Stay here," Lacy said. "Don't move. If I'm not back by nightfall, then I want you to go into town, find the sheriff, and tell him what happened."
Mom, don't go,
Katie said, frightened. "I'll be fine," Lacy said. "Repeat back to me what I just told you." Katie sniffled, but managed to say it back. It was important for a person to repeat the information in times of crisis to ensure they understood. "Good girl," Lacy said, and she kissed her daughter and then hurried up to the house. Lacy didn't know who could have come to their property. She wasn't sure if it was the terrorists or someone else who had wandered off the road searching for help. She hoped they were far enough off the main roads to avoid any stranded motorists, but until she saw them, she wouldn't know for sure. Lacy hustled toward the main house, moving quickly and quietly through the woods. She didn't want to take the dirt path because it would provide an easy line of sight for anyone at the house, and she knew these woods better than anyone else. Lacy neared the house and saw the front door open. She paused 20 yards away, taking stock of the situation until she was confident the coast was clear. She heard the people inside her home and moved forward, wanting to end this quickly. The voices grew louder as she approached the door. From outside, she saw that the cabin had been turned inside out as the intruders searched for supplies. Lacy counted 3 inside, more than she would have liked, but still manageable, considering the circumstances. She still had the element of surprise and would use that to her advantage. All 3 of the terrorists wore Kevlar. Lacy figured they must have been a scouting party to search the area for supplies. They had found more than they could want when they stumbled across Lacy's homestead, but they were about to pay the ultimate price for trespassing. Lacy made sure she was ready before turning the corner into the house. She had a few seconds to take them out without any blowback, but she would need to be precise with her shooting. She had always been a good shot, accurate and fast, but 3 armed targets were a stretch, even for her. It all came down to execution, and the only thing that mattered right now was getting those people out of her house. Because it was a haven for her children, and she wasn't giving it up without a fight.
"This place is the fucking jackpot,"
one of the terrorists said.
"There are enough supplies to get the entire team through a month."
We'll need more bodies to carry it all back,
Another said.
Step outside and send word to the others. We must secure the area and deal with whoever lives here.
No need, Lacy said, spinning around the corner. Lacy struck her first target with no problem. The bullet went through the man's left eye, and when Lacy lined up her second shot, the terrorist was still reaching for his rifle. And she put a bullet through his nose. The third shooter was the closest, and he had an angle on Lacy. He bum-rushed her, tackling her into the wall. The violent contact broke some pictures hanging behind her, and the glass shattered on the floor next to them. They rolled over the shards, pieces sticking through their clothing and digging into their skin. The terrorist was strong and manhandled Lacy, but he was all brute strength. When she had joined the forest ranger's office, Lacy had studied some ground fighting techniques. It was part of a program with the FBI and other security departments nationwide to promote an atmosphere of education and cooperation, and Lacy used that training to her advantage. The man struggled against Lacy. Even with all his size and strength, he couldn't overcome the leverage she had on him once it was applied, and with a final twist of her arm, she heard the pop of his spinal cord, and the man went limp. Lacy shoved the guy off her and caught her breath. She lay there for a moment, staring at the 3 bodies in her house, all of whom would have killed her if they'd had the chance. But these men had infiltrated Lacy's home, the sacred place where she slept and raised her children. They had earned their fate. Lacy made sure to drag the bodies out of the cabin and tucked them in the woods before she returned to her daughter. Katie didn't say anything on the walk back to the cabin, but when they entered the front door, she saw the mess inside, and it was clear to her that there was a struggle.
You moved the bodies?
Katie asked. It pained Lacy to hear her daughter talk that way, but Lacy chose not to hide things from her. Yes, and you won't find them as long as you don't go looking for them. Katie stared up at her mother and let go of Lacy's hand.
Do you know what happens now? They'll send more. They'll keep sending more to our house and every house. You see it now? How something has to be done?
Lacy had no idea where her father had gotten the wisdom she had garnered, but perhaps her father's death had forced her to grow up. It certainly had changed Dusty, but he already had been in the throes of teenage hormones. There was little hope that Dusty would listen to Lacy's advice, though that didn't stop her from trying. Dusty listened to her on some things and ignored her on most others, but Katie had always been receptive. She had been a good little soldier for her mother, always doing what she was told. Until now. I need to return to the Welcome Center, Lacy said. You stay here, lock the doors, and if there is any trouble, you go to the cellar, lock it, and stay down there until I come back.
And what if you don't come back?
Katie asked. I'm coming back, Lacy said. Come hell or high water, I will come back to you. I promise. Lacy dropped to her knee and looked her daughter in the eye. Do you believe me? Katie hesitated, but she finally nodded. Good, Lacy said, and then she hugged her daughter. You mean everything to me. You know that?
Ditto,
Katie answered.
Just keep your promise.
I will, Lacy said. Lacy ensured her daughter was set up with the necessary supplies and was good to go before heading out. She already provided her little girl with information on how to defend herself if it came to it, but she wasn't sure if Katie would be able to execute. You know what to do if someone comes, right? Lacy asked.
I know,
Katie answered, but there was doubt in her voice. A hesitation only natural for a child to have about such a horrible action. Hey, Lacy said, lifting Katie's chin so their eyes met. There's nothing wrong with protecting yourself. You do what you have to do, no matter what. I want you to promise me that.
I promise,
Katie answered. Good, Lacy replied. You keep your promise, and I'll keep mine, okay? Lacy kissed her daughter once more, and then she gathered the necessary provisions she'd need for the fight at the park's Welcome Center. She collected enough guns and ammunition to arm her staff, drive off the terrorists, and get the civilians out. She wasn't sure if they could repel the enemy from the woods, but Lacy had every intention of trying. These terrorists were a disease that needed to be purged from her forest, and Lacy intended to remove every single one of them. Chapter 14. With the professor dead, the other students turned to Dusty for answers. But Dusty was at a loss. There was so much chaos happening around them, so much death. Dusty didn't think it was possible to escape it. And after Justin told Dusty about the satellite link that would allow the terrorists to find any location in the world, he shuddered to think about how those animals would use that technology. But was it really Dusty's problem? It was the question he had grappled with. His conscience wrestling with his survival instincts, which told him to run. But how far could he run before his guilt caught up with him? There's something I need to do, Dusty said, looking at Claire. I need you to stay here and wait for me. What are you talking about? Claire asked. Dusty, we need to get out of here. We will, Dusty answered. But the terrorists want something that could be dangerous in their hands. I need to see if I can steal it before they leave campus. Are you crazy? Claire asked. I'll come back, Dusty said. Just keep the doors locked. Stay low and quiet. And what about him? One of the students gestured to Professor Edwards' body. Edwards had been one of Dusty's mentors ever since he started pre-med. He was a smart man, and his death was a blow to the healthcare profession. but the professor's intelligence paled in comparison to his morals. The thought of leaving him on that cot to rot in the heat of the building made Dusty's stomach churn. "Put him in the freezer," Dusty said. "It doesn't have power, but it'll stay cold long enough to keep him preserved."
I don't think he'll fit,
one student said. "Then make room," Dusty said. "It's the best we can do right now." The other students went to work on moving the professor, and Claire grabbed Dusty's hands. She was always warm to the touch, but between the stuffy room and her adrenaline, her hands were burning hot. "I don't think you should leave," Claire said. "I'll be careful," Dusty said. "I promise." Dusty kissed her, and then left the lab before she convinced him otherwise. She had always been good at pushing Dusty to get what she wanted. But he couldn't sit back and do nothing after learning about the software in the engineering department. Dusty paused for a long moment in the hallway. The bodies sprinkled throughout the building and the rest of the campus were still a jarring sight. But Dusty was armed now with the rifle he'd stolen off the terrorists he'd choked out. If someone shot at him, he'd shoot back. Dusty moved quickly through the building, wanting to stay indoors as much as possible before he was forced to navigate the campus in the open. He had no idea how many terrorists were crawling the school grounds, so every corner he turned, Dusty braced himself to shoot. Aside from the occasional gunshot around the campus, Dusty saw no other terrorists until he returned to the engineering building. When he did arrive, Dusty realized he had no idea of the engineering professor's name. Without a name, Dusty wouldn't be able to find the professor's office, which meant Dusty needed to go back to the hallway where he left the professor's body. The terrorist security around the engineering building wasn't as tight as before, and Dusty feared that meant the enemy had already found what they were looking for. Undeterred, Dusty snuck back into the building, checked the hallway on the first floor, and found the professor's body in the same position. Dusty confirmed the hallway was clear and hurried to the professor's body. Thankfully, the professor's faculty ID was on a lanyard around his neck. "Okay, Professor Stutz," Dusty said. "Let's go find your codebook." Dusty stood up, but in the same motion, the terrorist Dusty had choked out in the classroom stepped out in the hallway. He had a dazed look on his face, and when he locked eyes with Dusty, they widened with the realization of who he was. "You!" he said, but before he could make a move, Dusty shot the terrorist in the chest. The man was flung backward, but the Kevlar around his torso stopped the bullet, and Dusty rushed forward and cracked the rifle stock against the terrorist's head, knocking him out. Dusty glanced in both directions after the altercation, wondering if anyone had heard anything. When no one rushed out, Dusty dragged the terrorist back into the room to keep him hidden from the hallway. He then checked the building directory at the front atrium of the engineering building and found Professor Stutz's office number. "Third floor," Dusty said. "Room 371. Dusty rushed to the stairwell and then bounded up the staircase, mindful of any gunmen on each new flight of stairs. Dusty paused at the door to the third-floor hallway, again peering through the single-pane window to ensure the coast was clear. With the hallway empty, Dusty took his chance. Dusty sprinted through the corridor in search of the professor's office and eventually found it halfway down the hall. The door was open, and when Dusty stepped inside, he found the office completely ransacked. The terrorists had already been here, but Dusty wasn't sure if they'd found the book or not. The current condition of the office made searching for the codebook feel like a needle in a haystack situation. But Dusty was confident he was smarter than the armed thugs who'd stormed the campus. He just needed to think through the problem. Every professor had a project they considered their life's work. Considering the unique nature of this software that the professor had developed to link up with the satellite, Dusty figured this could be it for Professor Stutz. So where would I keep my life's work? Dusty asked himself, scanning the office. The computer was obviously not an option considering the EMP, but the bookshelf behind the desk had been knocked barren of their contents. Dusty figured a professor at a college would have a special place in his heart for books, so he decided to start there. Dusty picked up the old textbooks, unsure of what he was looking for as he sifted through the pages, but he hoped it would stick out to him when he saw it. He should have asked Justin more questions about the book, but it was too late now. Dusty was halfway through the books on the floor when he heard voices in the hallway. He glanced at the door and froze, realizing he was a sitting duck. Dusty scanned the office, and then saw the closet door. He rushed inside and tucked himself in the back underneath the bottom shelf. It was cramped inside, but Dusty didn't mind being uncomfortable, so long as it kept him alive. He barely fit below with a gun in his arms, and he stared through the cracked closet door, praying he wasn't discovered, and if he was, that he'd have the courage to pull the trigger. "I told you, we turned this place upside down," a voice said, and then Dusty saw 3 men enter the office. "It's not here."
The boy said it was here, so it has to be here,
Another said, far angrier than the first. Dusty could see everyone clearly, but he recognized one of the men. It was the same brute he had seen in the hallway, the one who'd shot the professor after he'd refused to give up the information about the book. It appeared the giant was in charge.
"I don't know what to tell you,"
the other man said.
"We looked and we didn't find it."
Then look again,
The giant bellowed, causing the other 2 men to cower.
we need that book. Without it, our plan won't work, and I will not tolerate failure.
He stepped closer and growled.
Do I make myself clear?
"Yes, sir."
Yes, sir.
Dusty waited in the stretch of uncomfortable silence, unsure if the threats would be followed up with violence, but the big brute said nothing else as he walked out of the office. The pair of men who lingered behind both exhaled.
"Ugh. We need to find that book or he's gonna kill us,"
The guy said.
Yeah, no kidding.
The other replied.
So, where do you want to start? We've already looked everywhere, like you said.
"Maybe he hid it? Like, in the ceiling or something."
All right. We'll need a ladder to get those panels down. Come on, let's get this done.
A pair of men walked out, and Dusty hurried out from under the shelf. He stepped back into the office, soaked in sweat, and he realized how close he had come to being discovered. But if the terrorists didn't have the codebook, it was still in the office. Justin might have been wrong about the book's location, but it made sense for the professor to keep it in his office. Judging by how the terrorists had turned the office upside down, it seemed to Dusty that they had searched every corner of the office and were now going to start tearing down the ceiling. But there was no reason for the professor to keep the codebook hidden. There was no way he could have foreseen these terrorists coming to campus. And because there was no threat that someone would take it, Dusty doubted that it would have been locked away.
"So, where would you put it?"
Dusty asked. With time running out, he scanned the office by taking a step back. If this codebook was as important as the professor made it out to be, he would have kept it somewhere that would have been easy for him to get to, where he regularly spent time. Aside from the desk in the office, Dusty noticed a chair by the window. It was a lounge chair, and there was a small coffee table next to it and a coffee stain with a few snacks that had been flipped over on the other side. It was obvious the professor had spent time in that chair, looking out the window, reading, thinking, grading papers, or drinking coffee. Dusty walked over to the chair and examined the mess all around the floor. There were some books and magazines that had been flattened out, and as Dusty scanned through them, he found what the terrorists had missed. Wedged between 2 engineering magazines was a small journal. When Dusty opened it and flipped to the first page, he had found what he was looking for with the title GPS Codes scribbled at the top of the page. Below was a series of complex entry codes for the software system to start up and operate. Dusty smiled, ecstatic that he'd found it, and he quickly snapped the book shut and stepped out into the hallway. But as Dusty was moving toward the stairs, the 2 terrorists from earlier burst into the hallway from the stairwell door, carrying a ladder between them. All 3 of them froze in the hallway, staring at one another, and then one of the terrorists pointed to the book in Dusty's hands.
What have you got there?
He asked. Dusty panicked, and he quickly sprinted away in the other direction, having no idea where he was going. Stop him! The terrorist dropped the ladder, the metal banging loudly against the tile. Dusty didn't dare turn around as he turned the hallway's corner, making a sharp left. He needed to get out of there before the terrorists caught him, killed him, or worse. Chapter 15.
Don't let them leave! Lock down the building!
The terrorists were screaming into their radios as they chased Dusty down the hallway, burning up the short lead Dusty had on them. Dusty frantically searched for an exit on his escape, but then he remembered the rifle banging against his side as he ran. He wasn't unarmed. He could fight back. Dusty spun around as the terrorists rounded the corner he'd just taken, and when they revealed themselves, he squeezed the trigger. The automatic rifle sprayed a round of bullets at them, but they all missed, putting holes in the walls and doors instead of the terrorists' flesh. But it succeeded in forcing them to retreat behind the corner of the hallway, buying Dusty some more time. Dusty finally spotted another exit for more stairs, and he burst into the stairwell. But when he tried to go down, he heard more terrorists sprinting up. He stopped, and then remembered the roof and the ladder he had taken to get into the building the first time. Dusty sprinted up the steps, thighs and calves burning as he ascended the stairs. With every step up, he was fully aware that the enemy was still after him. It was a frantic chase up the staircase, and Dusty pushed himself harder and faster than he ever thought possible. When he finally reached the roof, Dusty sprinted toward the fire escape that led to the ground level. He peered over the side, making sure there weren't any terrorists waiting below, but climbing down the ladder would make him a sitting duck. He needed to get down quickly. The side of the stairwell had a pole attached to it, and sliding down was Dusty's quickest option for escape. He secured the gun and the codebook, and then hopped over the side, grabbing the pole with both hands. It was a long way down, and while Dusty had never been afraid of heights, this was a stretch even for him. But he didn't have a choice. The terrorist burst onto the roof, and Dusty relaxed his grip on the pole, sliding down as quickly as his nerves could handle. The hot pole burned his hands and thighs on the way down, to the point where he thought his skin was going to burn off. But when Dusty landed hard on the ground, he stole a quick glance at his palms. While his skin was red, it was still attached to his body. Dusty ducked into the next building, which happened to be the history department, just as the terrorists neared the edge of the roof and opened fire. They shattered the glass windows and doors, and Dusty kicked it into another gear as he sprinted back toward the medical building. Dusty had never been a runner, but fear and adrenaline pushed his body to new heights. He took a serpentine path to the medical building, making sure he evaded those terrorists at all cost. When Dusty finally reached the medical building, he glanced behind him to ensure that no one was following him. From what he could tell, the coast was clear. Nevertheless, he understood that he was a person of interest now, and they needed to leave. Dusty returned to the lab where Claire and the others were waiting, but he found that most of the students had already left. Claire rushed toward Dusty, wrapping her arms around him as she kissed his neck. "Thank God you're all right," Claire said. "I heard so much shooting. What's going on?"
"We need to leave," Dusty said. "I stole something from the engineering department, and they're looking for me."
"You said no vehicles are working," Claire said. "How are we supposed to leave?"
"My bike is a kickstart, 2-stroke, Dusty said. It has no electronic components. My mom..."
Dusty hadn't spoke much about his mother to Claire, but what little he had told her wasn't that flattering. He didn't hate his mother, but they disagreed on many things. His father's death had left an imprint on him that had changed the course of his life. It was the reason he wanted to go into medicine. It was the reason he was at Wake Forest. It was also the reason he had found Claire.
"Dusty?"
Claire asked.
"Nothing,"
Dusty answered.
"Come on. We need to move."
The other students decided to stay in the building, hoping the situation would blow over. Dusty didn't have time to convince them otherwise. All that mattered right now was getting to his bike before someone else realized it was the only working mode of transportation. The campus was still covered with terrorists, and the sporadic noise of gunfire acted as a harsh reminder that so many of the students were helpless to do anything. What had transpired there was murder, plain and simple. The people responsible would have to answer for their crimes one day, either in this life or the next. However, Dusty was uniquely positioned to try to stop the terrorists before they did even more damage to the world. But Dusty needed to be careful. It wasn't just his life that he was risking. He had to think about Claire. The pair hadn't been together long, but they'd formed a strong connection. Dusty's mother would probably think he was too young to have these sorts of feelings. That there would be other girls and more to learn about life, but the moment they had looked at one another, they felt an instant connection. "Don't let go of my hand," Dusty said, squeezing Claire's fingers. "No matter what happens, we stay together, okay?" Claire nodded. She didn't show her fear, not on the outside, but he knew her well enough to know that she was worried. It was in her eyes. They weren't as steely or rigid as the rest of her, but he wouldn't let anything happen to her, no matter what they encountered. Dusty led them through the medical department and toward 2 doors on the building's west side. It was the quickest way to his motorbike across their campus near the dorms. From their position by the door, there were several dozen terrorists and a field of bodies standing in their way. But when Dusty scanned the roofs of the nearby building, he saw no terrorists waiting above. If they could quickly move and stay close to the buildings, they might be able to evade the terrorists still roaming the campus. "Let's go," Dusty said, pulling Claire from the building and out into the open. It was usually a 15-minute walk from the medical building to Dusty's dorm, but as they sprinted, he hoped to make it in half the time. Dusty wasn't in the best shape, but Claire was an avid runner. She had done track in high school and had easily kept pace with Dusty as they navigated the campus. Dusty kept his head on a swivel, mindful of approaching threats. His adrenaline was pumping and his heart was pounding so hard that each pulse bounced through his fingertips. There was so much blood in him, so much blood on the ground, so much blood everywhere. Another gunshot, close enough to cause them both to jump, caught Dusty's attention to the left. He watched one of the terrorists put a bullet into the body of a student who was already lying on the ground. Dusty didn't stop to see what was happening, but the small glimpse he had caught reminded him of someone kicking an animal that was already dead. There was a cruelty and maliciousness from the terrorist, trying to satisfy an unslackable thirst for violence. It was pure madness. When they neared the open quad, which separated the classroom from the dorms, Dusty and Claire paused at the edge of one of the buildings. They would have gone farther, but several terrorists were near the parking garage by the dorms. "Where are they going?" Claire asked, catching her breath. While Claire was still breathing okay, Dusty was sucking wind. "I don't know." He bent over on his knees, his lungs on fire. "No, keep straight," Claire said, forcing Dusty upright. "You'll get better oxygen when you're upright. Trust me, I know it hurts, but it's for the best." "Thanks, Doc," Dusty said. Claire eyed him. It was the nickname he'd given her before they'd even started seeing one another. In response, she had always called him Nurse. But Claire wasn't in a playful mood right now. She was focused on the obstacle in front of them. And as Dusty examined the situation, he saw a large truck leaving the parking lot. It wasn't a semi, but it was jacked up and had a large trailer attached to it that looked like it was fully loaded. It appeared the terrorists were taking more from the engineering lab than just the codebook and some software. "What are they doing?" Claire asked. "I don't know," Dusty answered. "But they're not going to get very far without this." Dusty removed the codebook he had stolen from Professor Stutz's office. "They can't access the satellite without it," Dusty said. "Which is why we need to go." "Go where?" Claire asked. One place stuck out to him more than any other, but Dusty wasn't sure he wanted to go home. His complicated relationship with his mother didn't make it an enticing prospect, but there was no safer place to wait out this disaster. "Dusty, look," Claire said. Dusty followed Claire's finger and saw a group of students being escorted along with some gear toward the big trucks. Dusty peered through the scope of his rifle and saw Justin among the students who had been captured. "Shit," Dusty said. "They have some of the engineering students."
Do they know the codes in this book? Claire asked.
"I can't imagine the terrorists would have kidnapped them if they didn't," Dusty said. "We need to follow them."
Dusty, are you sure? Claire asked. I know you want to help, but maybe this is beyond our capabilities.
"I know it's dangerous," Dusty answered. "But my father told me that if you're ever in a position to help and you don't, it will haunt you for the rest of your life." Dusty knew that better than most, and from first-hand experience. His father wanted him to go hunting with him the day before his death, but Dusty hadn't wanted to go. It was cold, and he had plans with friends later. If Dusty had known then that it would be the last time he ever saw his father, he would have felt differently. But that previous conversation, the fact that the next time he saw his father was in a casket, had stayed with him to this very day. There was so much left unsaid between them, so many questions he wished he could ask his father, even now. But one answer was clear to Dusty. Despite the danger of following those people, the only thing that mattered now was ensuring no one else died. "I'll go alone," Dusty said. "You can stay here, hunker down, and stay in my dorm. I have food and water inside that will last you a week if you ration, and then I'll come back for you after I figure out what they're doing."
I'm not letting you go alone, Claire said, and then she straightened up. We go together, no matter where that is.
If Dusty had ever doubted Claire's character, all of that was put to rest. He pulled her close, kissed her, and nearly whispered the 3 words to her that neither had yet to utter. But Dusty didn't want to let his emotions get the better of him, and he didn't want Claire to think he was only saying it because of the circumstances. But with so much uncertainty about the future, he felt compelled to speak. "Claire, The gunshot silenced him, and they both ducked. Dusty glanced behind him and saw the shooter lining up another shot. "Go!" Dusty shouted, pulling Claire behind one of the buildings for cover. The shooter chased them into the quad, but Dusty didn't sprint to the middle, where he would be a sitting duck. He pulled Claire along the back side of the building that butted up against the square courtyard. He set his sights on the visitor center, where prospective students and their parents arrived to view the campus. Dusty had done a few volunteer tours during his first semester, hoping to make friends. It was how he and Claire had linked up. But the building wasn't close, and despite their speed and haste, the gunmen caught up to them quickly, firing at will. Every gunshot made Dusty glance at Claire to make sure she was all right. But the gunfire was also drawing the attention of the terrorists near the parking garage. He didn't think they'd send more shooters over to hurt them, but he didn't want to risk it. He couldn't keep running, and he couldn't put Claire's life in danger anymore. The moment they reached the visitor center, Dusty opened the doors and pushed Claire in before she could stop him.
Dusty, no!
Claire pounded on the glass, but Dusty slid a pole from a nearby sign through the doors to keep her sealed inside. Dusty turned to face the shooter, knowing that the only thing the man was going to respond to was violence. And if that was what he wanted, then so be it. Dusty had been under pressure before, but it was nothing like this. He remembered his mother's words. When the adrenaline is pumping, when the world around you is eroding into oblivion, nearly everyone folds under the pressure. Training is nothing without execution. The key is to break down the process and talk through each action, no matter how small. Dusty spun around and planted his right knee to stabilize himself. From there, he raised his weapon and pressed the stock firmly against his shoulder. He brought his finger to the trigger in the same instant that he raised the gun to aim. All of that was happening while the gunmen on the run continued to fire, the bullets barely missing Dusty even though he was standing still. The terrorist was running on adrenaline, and it was much harder to hit a moving target while running than stationary. Even if the target wasn't moving. Dusty forced the world to slow down. Even though the chaos and adrenaline pumping through his veins was enough to cause most people to crack, he knew there would be no do-overs. This wasn't the classroom anymore. It was the real world, and the consequences of failure was death. Dusty took a breath as he brought the terrorist into his sights. He lined up his shot, steadied his hand, and squeezed the trigger, striking the terrorist in the leg and forcing him to the ground. The terrorist screamed, continuing to shoot even though he wasn't aiming at anything. But with the gunman down, Dusty had a chance to kill him, to put him out of his misery. But again, when he put the terrorist's head into his crosshairs, he couldn't pull the trigger. Dusty had a flashback to the first time he had gone hunting with his parents. He had wounded a deer, but couldn't deliver the final kill shot. His father told him that he needed to put the bullet in because it was inhumane to let the animal go on suffering. But Dusty didn't have a problem with the terrorist suffering. Dusty turned around and removed the pole, locking the doors together where Claire was inside. The moment he entered, he was met with a swift slap across the face. "That was so stupid!" Claire shouted. "You could have gotten yourself killed!" Claire was red with anger, but the moment after she screamed at him, she pulled him into his arms and squeezed him tight. "So dumb," Claire said, her voice softer than before. Dusty leaned back and then grabbed her hand. "Come on, we still need to keep moving." They didn't encounter any more enemies on their way to the dorms. But when they neared his motorbike, Dusty noticed the trucks the terrorists had loaded up were already well down the road. The only thing slowing them down was the busted-down cars blocking the streets, but the terrorists had thought ahead for that, taking a massive plow on the lead truck to help clear the path. It slowed them, but it didn't stop them. Dusty found his bike outside the dorm building, still intact. He hurried to remove the chain and wrapped it around his shoulder. He got on the bike and kicked the starter, pressing down on it with all his weight. The bike didn't start at first, and Dusty briefly panicked. He jumped up and down again, finally hitting the kickstart with the necessary force, and the engine sputtered to life. Dusty revved the engine several times, ensuring the motor stayed warm, and then motioned for Claire to hop on the back. Dusty only had one helmet, which he gave to Claire. As she was putting it on, the sound of Dusty's bike garnered some unwanted attention. Students were coming out of the building, curious to hear a mechanical sound after so much silence. They all stared at the bike, some shouting questions drowned out by the bike's sputtering engine. But Dusty didn't need to hear what they said to know what they wanted. Their eyes were filled with greed and desperation. Dusty's bike represented escape and freedom. "Claire, hold on!" Dusty shouted. And then she wrapped her arms around his waist as the first students rushed forward. Dusty revved the engine, hitting the throttle hard. Hands reached out for them as they passed, a few nails digging through the fabric in his shirt. But Dusty never let off the gas. Claire clung tightly to Dusty, pressing her body against his back as Dusty escaped the rush of students and headed out onto the road. Ahead, Dusty could still see the caravan of terrorist vehicles heading north. Dusty wasn't sure where they were going, but they happened to be on the same path Dusty. Chapter 16. Before Lacy left the homestead, she made sure to pat down the dead terrorists for any other ammunition or weapons she could use. There were guns at the warden's office at the entrance to the park, but if the terrorists were smart enough to scan the surrounding woods for supplies, they had likely found everything at the park that they could use to their advantage. The terrorists had a few grenades and some hollow point rounds, which told Lacy they were cutthroat with their mission. Lacy should have kept one of them alive to question him. It was obvious to her that these people were responsible for the EMP detonation. But how they did it, and more importantly, why, was unknown. All the more reason to ensure she grabbed as many weapons as possible. It was a long trek from the cabin to the state park's welcome center. Especially since Lacy wasn't taking the main roads. There was no clear path, but Lacy had made the trip a few times before, and the long walk through nature gave her the unique opportunity to enjoy the silence of the woods. The world was too noisy and far too busy for her. But as busy as it was, as loud as it was, Lacy never imagined or wanted an EMP event to happen. She was prepared, but she never thought it would come to fruition. But then again, there had been so much chaos lately that she should have known better. People were going to extremes instead of making rational choices. People had called her choices extreme. Now Lacy reckoned they wished they would have listened to her. The life Lacy had chosen to live, the way she lived it, wasn't easy. But she had never wanted an easy life. That was what she believed most people wanted. They wanted to coast. Walk through the world without worrying and have no purpose in their lives other than to burn their days away. But hours weren't endless. Eventually, time ran out, and Lacy didn't want to look back on her life and think that she had wasted so much of it. She worked hard every day to savor the moments, even the bad ones, because the bad moments were just as important as the good ones. The hard times built character and provided clarity for the good times often glossed over. Lacy missed her husband. She had made sure his death meant something, and she was glad she acted when she did. Lacy had put herself and her family in a position to survive this event. While many other families struggled to keep their heads above water, she was already on dry land. It would become more challenging as time went on. Eventually, people would come for the resources she had, but she was ready to defend them. Of course, there was a limit to what she could do, to how many enemies she could repel before she was overwhelmed, and if people grew desperate enough, hungry enough, she knew she didn't have enough bullets to stop them. But Lacy didn't want to kill anyone. She thought maybe Katie was right about helping people. If Lacy could ensure that the town had at least the tools necessary to rebuild, then they wouldn't have to bother her for food and water. The last thing she wanted was to interact with those people, though. They hated her and called her Black Widow for a reason. She remembered the first time someone had called her that name. It took all her patience not to hit the woman. The town had made up its own story about what had happened to her husband, but Lacy knew the truth, and she was going to take that truth to her grave. As she neared the state welcome center, Lacy eventually heard voices through the trees. She stuck as close to the woods as possible, staying hidden from the terrorists' line of sight. The welcome center was locked down, with 2 terrorists posted on the front entrance and 2 on the rear for emergency exits. The rest of the terrorists were gone, and so was the large truck that had been brought up and unloaded with gear. Lacy didn't know why the welcome center needed to be guarded, or why they hadn't killed everyone and moved on. The fact that they were willing to hold hostages told Lacy that perhaps the terrorists didn't fully believe their plan was going to work. They were preparing for the possible outcomes of their failure, and they wanted a backup plan with hostages to negotiate with law enforcement. But if they believed they could fail, then they weren't as strong as they thought they were. Lacy moved closer toward the welcome center, where she had a better view of the guards at the doors. The best move forward for her was to enter through the rear entrance. Unfortunately, she didn't have a silencer on her rifle, so the moment she started shooting, she would give away her position. She needed to find another way to take them out. So far, Lacy had been working on their terms, simply reacting to all the terrible things they'd done, and that was no way to gain any momentum. She needed to put herself in control, draw them to her, and fight them on her terms. Lacy positioned herself in a good spot in the woods, remaining hidden, and then created a trap for when the terrorists would eventually wander over. It didn't matter if they came one at a time, but Lacy hoped to pull them all out together. Once Lacy was ready, she made some noise in the wood, loud enough for the guards to notice, but not big enough to reveal that it was a person. "What the hell was that?"
A bear?
"There are bears out here? God, I hate nature."
When neither of the guards moved, Lacy rattled some branches, prompting one of the guards to inch closer to the thick section of the woods outside the welcome center.
"Are you crazy?"
the guard who stayed behind asked.
"You want to get eaten by a bear?"
I have a gun. the other said. If the bear gets too close, I'll shoot it.
The gunman stopped when he saw the footprint Lacy had left behind.
Hey, there's someone out there.
How do you know that?
The other asked.
Just come here and look.
The other guard eventually got off his ass and walked over, and the pair made their way through the forest, following Lacy's footprints. She could still see them from her position. She needed to time her shot perfectly. She would only get one chance to kill them both and make it out alive.
Who the hell is it? The guard asked. Someone sneak out that we didn't see?
Shut up, the other answered. You want to give us away?
It was too late for that, and before either of them realized it, they entered the crook of the forest where Lacy was waiting. They never saw Lacy coming when she plunged the knife into their necks, slicing quick and deep. They tried to scream, but their words were trapped in their throats, the blood running down the front of their necks. Whatever last words they would have spoken dripped onto the forest floor with the last few bits of their life. The pair collapsed, and Lacy quickly returned to the welcome center, wanting to get inside before the other terrorists realized their friends were missing. Lacy bounded soundlessly through the woods as she returned to the welcome center. She checked to see if the area was cleared, but so far as she could tell, no one had noticed the two guards' absence at the back door. Lacy hurried to the rear entrance and rushed inside. She silently closed the door behind her and made her way through the darkened back room to the main section of the building where everyone was being held. When she finally reached the door, she opened it slowly, unsure what she'd find. She sighed in relief when she saw everyone staring at her from the floor.
Lacy?
Billy was the first to stand.
How the hell did you get here?
It doesn't matter, Lacy said, holding the back door open. Get everyone out into the woods, then head into town. The sheriff will make sure everyone gets where they need to go.
But, Lacy…
No, you need to go, Lacy said. We're already short on time, and I don't know how much longer it's going to be safe for everyone to leave. So get going. Go! Billy didn't object and started pulling the civilians and the other staff toward the exit. Lacy stood guard on the back door as they all escaped, but after they were gone, Billy made his final plea.
Lacy, they're up to something, Billy said.
They took their supplies and most of their men up the trail to the lookout point. They had some machine with them. What kind of machine? Lacy asked.
I don't know, like a big computer or something?
Billy said, but he wasn't confident. Right, well, get these people into town, and then tell the sheriff what you know, Lacy said.
And then what?
Billy asked. Lacy liked Billy. He was a good ranger, but now wasn't the time for him to bog her down with questions. Then you do what you can to survive, Lacy answered. Billy frowned, disappointed.
Lacy, we have to do something.
Those terrorists are going to keep hurting people. You worry about getting those civilians into town, Lacy said. Then we'll worry about what to do next, okay? It wasn't the answer Billy wanted, but it appeased him nonetheless. He took off, hurrying down the mountain and leading the civilians to safety. Lacy was about to join them, but she wanted a moment to assess the park. She had dedicated her life to protecting the land and ridding the forest of the predators that threatened it. The men standing guard outside were undoubtedly a threat to the life beyond the forest. But she had to think of her children and her family. There were limits to what she could do alone. But if the town joined her, they might stand a chance at winning this fight. The only question Lacy wasn't sure of was whether the town would stand with her. Why should she fight to protect people who didn't care about her? Who had ridiculed her and left her beaten and broken? They had wanted her to fail. So why should she help them succeed? But deep down, Lacy already knew the answer to that question. She needed to be the person her daughter believed her to be, who she used to be before Sean's death, because the only way for evil to win was if good people did nothing. Lacy was about to leave when she heard a truck coming up the road. The vehicle was big and loud enough to be heard through the building, garnering the attention of the two men out front. Curious, Lacy moved silently toward the front to get a better look at the arrival, and when she did, she was shocked to see what the enormous vehicle was carrying. Missiles. Big ones, lined up like a military parade. She counted at least 24 of them already in their launchers, and the moment the truck pulled off, the guards who had stayed behind started whooping and hollering. It appeared that the group's ambitions went beyond their small town. Lacy needed to tell Tommy what was happening, and they needed to stop the enemy before the situation got out of hand. Lacy hurried out the back, and when she reached the woods, she stopped when she heard the familiar noise of a 2-stroke engine backfiring. She'd heard it hundreds of times and knew it like a familiar bird call in the wild. It was Dusty's bike. And if Lacy had heard it, then so had the terrorists. Chapter 17. Dusty had meant to get the engine fixed to stop the backfiring, but he'd never gotten around to it. He'd kept a reasonable distance between himself and the terrorist caravan that he'd followed, and for good reason. The group had stopped at a warehouse and picked up another truckload of weapons in the form of missiles. Actual missiles. The kind he'd seen used in foreign wars, now here, about to be deployed on innocent civilians God knows where. And with the GPS software and equipment they had stolen from the engineering department, they could send those missiles anywhere they wanted. It didn't seem possible that something like that could happen in their small town, let alone Dusty's backyard. Big Rock State Park had been his playground growing up. His childhood was written in those woods and mountains. To see it infiltrated by such evil men made his blood boil. Dusty pulled off to the side of the road and shut off the engine. He let Claire get off first, and she removed her helmet, strands of hair glued to the front of her face. Her cheeks were red from the heat and the wind, but she wasn't afraid. That was one of the things Dusty had always admired about Claire since the first day they'd met. She wasn't intimidated by anyone or anything. She had a good head on her shoulders. She could see the path forward through the chaos. And after experiencing so much confusion in his own life, Dusty desperately needed someone to help show him the way. "Why did you stop?" Claire asked. "I didn't want them to see me coming," Dusty answered. "But I think I know where they're going. Only one road leads up to the forest entrance." "The one where your mom is a forest ranger?" Claire asked. Dusty nodded. "Why would they come here?" Claire asked. "I don't know," Dusty answered, and he gestured ahead. "If we stick to the trees near the road, we should stay out of sight." "Are you sure we should go alone?" Claire asked. "If your mother is here, maybe we should talk to her. She might know." "No," Dusty answered, harsher than he'd intended to sound. "I don't think that's a good idea." Claire tilted her head to the side, giving him the look that she always did whenever he didn't want to talk. "I told you, my relationship with my mother was complicated," Dusty said. "And you don't think now is a good time to bury the hatchet?" Claire asked. Part of Dusty wanted to believe what Claire was telling him, that there was a better way to go about this, but there was another part, the angry part that he'd kept hidden from everyone, including himself. He didn't know what would happen if he let it out, but he wasn't ready to find out anytime soon. "I don't even know where to find her," Dusty said, dodging the question. "And there's no way for me to contact her. But I need to figure out where these guys are going, and then we'll head into town and get the sheriff. I know him. He should be able to help." "Why not get the sheriff now?" Claire asked. "Look, if you don't want to come, you can stay," Dusty answered. "But I'm going." "This isn't about me acting tough, Dusty," Claire said. "This is about being smart. Those men, they're killers, and there are plenty of them and 2 of us with 1 gun. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to do the math here." I need to do this," Dusty said. Claire stepped closer. "Why? Talk to me. I want to know what's going on in your head." Plenty was going on, but Dusty didn't have the strength to tell her the truth. He wanted to prove himself that he could do this and wasn't afraid. But before either of them could continue the conversation, Dusty heard movement in the woods that caused him and Claire to stiffen. "What was that?" Claire asked. Dusty held up his hand for her to be quiet, and he studied the woods. He never had as good of an eye as his mother when they hunted. But he was better than most. Get down, Dusty said. Stay hidden.
Dusty, what's…
Dusty spun around and grabbed her wrist with a gentle strength that surprised her. She ducked behind some trees, out of sight of anyone in the woods or on the road. Dusty raised his rifle, searching for the source of the noise. It was probably just a deer, but if it was something else, if it was someone else, he wanted to be ready. Dusty did his best to use the scope to scan the woods for movement. It was easy to lose focus in the sea of trees, so he remembered what his mother had told him about searching the wood in buckets. Dusty scanned the area one section at a time, looking for anything unusual, but he saw nothing, but the hairs on the back of his neck stood up. His other senses warning him of danger. It was the same sensation he felt when he had visited the town after his father had died. Dusty had heard the whispers behind their backs, the veiled threats. At school, it was even worse, with many kids calling him the son of the Black Widow, which was the nickname that his mother had inherited after the death of his father. Dusty had always believed that his mother was holding a secret back about his father's death, but she had never shared it with him, no matter how many times Dusty had asked. Another snap of branches ahead prompted Dusty to search the area, but he found nothing. It wasn't until he heard more rustling and the whisper of voices that he understood the threat moving their way. 2 terrorists were hiking through the woods. They weren't moving stealthily, stomping through the woods like a pair of oxen. The same arrogance was displayed at the college. Whatever these people wanted, they believed no one could stop them, but Dusty would prove them wrong. Dusty dropped to a knee, staying out of sight for the time being, and waited for a good shot. But even though he had the drop on them, Dusty felt the familiar hesitation hold him back. It was the same doubt he'd felt back on the campus, the same doubt that had followed him his entire life. Dusty tried to find the courage to pull the trigger, to kill, but he couldn't forget the oath he'd taken when he'd entered med school. Putting a bullet in the heads of these people was a direct contradiction of that oath.
Hey, you see that one?
One of the men said. Dusty was spotted. They were looking right at him, even though they couldn't tell what they were seeing. They were going to kill him. He had to pull the trigger before it was too late. Kill or be killed, that was what his mother would tell him. He could hear her screaming in his ear, but even her voice couldn't bring him to do it. And then he heard the gunshot, and then another. At first, Dusty thought the terrorists had shot him, but as he peered through the scope again to check on their previous location, he saw their bodies on the ground. Someone had killed them, but Dusty had no idea who else was in the woods, or if they were friends or foes. A sudden movement to his left prompted Dusty to glance in the same direction, swinging the rifle in the same motion, but his finger wasn't even on the trigger anymore. He had been rendered motionless by his inaction and fear. But when Dusty saw the person emerge from the woods, he was even more surprised. It was his mother. "Are you all right?" Lacy asked, hurrying over to her son and patting him down like he was a child. Dusty didn't resist at first, but suddenly remembered he was grown and stepped back out of her reach, shrugging her off. "I'm fine." Claire walked over, and the 3 stared at each other momentarily, the awkwardness lingering as they all waited for someone else to speak. Claire took the first step. "I'm Claire," she said, reaching for Lacey's hand. "It's nice to meet you, Mrs. Stone." Dusty flushed red as his mother cast him a look. "She's my girlfriend," Dusty said. "Right," Lacy answered. "Well, we'll unpack that later. I need you to return to the cabin and stay with your sister. You can take her with you." Lacy spun around to leave, but Dusty wouldn't let her steamroll him. "I came to stop those people," Dusty said. "And you couldn't," Lacy said, back still to him. "Hey!" Dusty shouted, raising his voice loud enough to realize that he was being too vocal, which was confirmed when his mother spun around and gave him the look. He toned down the anger, but stood his ground. "I came to figure out what was happening." "You already know what's happening," Lacy said. "It was an EMP. Now I need you to go and stay with your sister to ensure she remains safe." "I'm going up there," Dusty said. Lacy clenched her jaw, and the small vein on the left side of her forehead started to throb. It was the telltale sign that she was angry. "Now isn't the time, Dusty," Lacy said. Dusty disagreed. If there would ever be a time for him, then now was that moment. They stole something from the campus, a satellite system that allows them to pinpoint any location in the world. I saw the missiles they had. If they get that system up and running, it's going to kill a lot of people. "And do you know how to stop it?" Lacy asked. Dusty straightened, glad to finally have an answer for her that made him feel big. "Yes." Lacy nodded. "Well, so do I. I destroy the machine, and they can't launch the missiles. End of story. Now go to the cabin and wait until I return." "Do you hear yourself?" Dusty asked. "You don't think you could use the help?" "I can help, Mom, despite what you might think of me." Lacy stepped closer to her son, dropping her voice so only he could hear. "You froze. I saw you. You can't take the shot, and that's fine. But if you come with me, you'll be in danger. I can't let that happen." Dusty couldn't help but feel shame. And as he watched his mother walk away, he knew he had failed.